Well, good morning, folks. I'd like to welcome you to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker, the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, as on most days, is comic books. The drill, more or less, I go to my storage locker, I bring back a pile of unsorted comics, I take them home, I look at them under a camera for your, entertainment, edification. And at some point, the cat is going to break in. I can't, it's not a maybe, it's not a possibly, it's almost, although I say that and he's sitting down now. But at some point, he's going to come over and want in on this action, and then that's just something that I haven't really been able to, I first tried taking videos without the cat, trying to figure out how I could distract him and get him to do something else while I was, but that's not really possible at all. So we just live with it. It's part of the fun, part of the attraction of the show. What can I say? Maybe if he gets really popular, print up T-shirts, because I'm not above merchandising my pet. I'm just not. That's not the world we live in, folks. All right, so Invincible Iron Man number 326, March 1996. Man, Teen Tony. All right, if you weren't around in the 90s, you might not know. Marvel, they had some problems in the 1990s. And essentially, they really, towards the middle of the decade, they kind of lost their way on a lot of their core titles. A lot of their core titles that weren't selling like core titles. They weren't selling well at all. Stuff that we now, with the hindsight of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we look and say, well, the Avengers, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, that's the backbone of the company. Those characters were not the backbone of the company in 1996. That was the problem. They were definitely underperforming. Like anyone could look at them and say that they were underperforming. And I want to make sure, because I've made this point a number of times, and I want to make sure every time I say it, that I'm not coming after any of the creators who were working at the time, because they were all doing their best. But the problem is that their best, the stories they were putting out, just weren't selling in the mid-90s. And the company was, putting a lot of good people on those books out there, more or less hanging them out to dry, because people weren't picking up the books. And what they were doing didn't seem to be working at all, because they were trying, like they had ideas. They were trying to throw, new stuff into the pot, but it ultimately wasn't enough. And this very same year, 1996, they announced that they were going to do Heroes Reborn, which was a whole other kettle of fish. The Image creators, who they lost in 1992, two of them came back and took over the core Marvel books, basically yanked them out of the Marvel editorial, and, there were hard feelings. There were definitely hard feelings, at least on the Marvel side, because, they came in and had their crown jewels stolen out from under them, because they weren't selling what it was thought that they could. And, to a degree, Marvel, they got the last laugh to a degree, because the Heroes Reborn books didn't get good reviews. And, when they came back and did the Heroes Return a year later, people really liked all of those books. Even the ones that weren't like, a home run, like the Heroes Return Iron Man, a solid double, still better than a book had been in years. Although, as I've said recently, the Heroes Reborn Iron Man was actually the most interesting of the Heroes Reborn titles. I got a video on that up on my TikTok, Synergy. They're on Instagram as well if you don't like TikTok, but a lot of people don't like TikTok. I'm only on TikTok because there's an audience there. I try to avoid actually looking at anything on the app. So this is what they were doing with Iron Man right before Heroes Reborn. They had this long Avengers storyline called The Crossing. And The Crossing was not a very good story. There's a part of me that loves it. I actually own the omnibus for it because it's such a wild one, but not necessarily in a good way. Basically, what they revealed is that Tony Stark had been a fifth column in the Avengers, basically mind controlled by Kang since the 60s, I want to say. So they were doing a retcon where he was just, all those stories, decades, was being revealed as him secretly being mind controlled by Kang. And so the way they got out of that is they went back in time and they brought his teenage counterpart from another universe into the future, from an alternate universe. Now you may be thinking, well, that sounds kind of similar to what they did with the X-Men in the 2010s. And yeah, actually, it is kind of similar, except for the fact that they kept going with that story for over half a decade. Those original 5 X-Men were in the present. They pulled the emergency cord on this relatively quick because they did not do very many Teen Tony stories. And this is actually from the only real Avengers crossover that they did with these iterations of the characters, which was Teen Tony, Shirtless Thor, because that was right after the Warren Ellis, Mike Deodato Thor revamp. That was actually pretty good and pretty popular. And also the Mark Waid Captain America. Mark Waid and Ron Garney Captain America, which was pretty much my favorite book for every month they did it. So it's not like they weren't trying, but what they were trying just wasn't working the way it could have. At least that was the perception. So they needed to press the big, panic button, and that certainly accomplished that goal. But let's look back in time and see what was happening right before the fall, so to speak. So this is March 1996, so this would have been on stands in December of 95. I remember that. I saw that on VHS. I didn't actually end up seeing that one in the theater. It was the 90s. Everyone was down with the Farley Spade team. And it was a terrible tragedy that when he died, because he hadn't really done more than a handful of not very great movies, but he was very funny himself, I thought, in them. They're still worth watching, even if they're not that good, simply because he was good in them. All right, so First Sign. This was a crossover with the aforementioned Captain America, Thor, and Avengers books. Terry Kavanagh, who I believe I mentioned the other day, perfectly decent writer. Early work from Jimmy Chung, someone who would go on to do a lot more work for Marvel. Still does a lot of good work for Marvel. Hector Collazo, Steve Ellis, names that haven't come up quite as much. Mark McKenna, Andy Lanning. He was actually also writing. He was both writing and inking for the company at the time. Man of many talents. Steve Moncuse. So Teen Tony, he's a kid. He's at Columbia University. That's him. Here I am, Tony Stark, so-called child prodigy, just trying to put one foot in front of the other, taking one step at a time. So, they're turning Iron Man into Spider-Man, which is kind of funny because many years in the future they're going to turn Spider-Man into Iron Man a couple times, but that's neither here nor there. And see, at the time, I remember being impressed by Chung's art. He did a series, I think the year after this, he did a book about Maverick, who's not an X-Man. He's never actually been an X-Man, but he's an X-Men supporting character. And he supported his book for about a year in 97. I think that was actually during the Heroes Reborn year. And I liked that book because Jimmy Chung was on it, and it was the book where he really sort of came into his own artistically. There's a Jimmy Chung before Maverick and a Jimmy Chung after Maverick. The book really, you can see it really stretches him. But even here, you know, for what they were for what Marvel mainline was publishing at the time, this is pretty good. This is putting the care. I'm going back to look at this because I'm realizing that this is part of their initiatives. Bring on Doc Doom, bring on the Molecule Man, bring on the entire Yancey Street Gang for all I care. Stretcho's back and Clobberin' Days are here again. So this is a ad for the very short-lived iteration of the book after Reed Richards came back and before Heroes Reborn. So that would have been like 5 or 6 months that version of the book existed. Things were changing very, very quickly. So he doesn't even have an Iron Man suit, if I recall correctly, at this point. He's still struggling along, sort of figuring out. He was just brought in the future and told, hey, you're going to be this Iron Man guy. So, like, figure it out. You're just saying it like that, you know, you can maybe see why the status quo didn't stick around this way for long. But as I was saying, here we're hooking up again with Captain America and Thor. This is Thor when a very brief period where he just wasn't really wearing a shirt. That was just a thing he was doing. And then he came back from Heroes Return, and he was wearing a shirt again, and everyone was happy about that. And then he asked everyone, like, what is it? Conan gets away with not wearing a shirt. It's like, yeah, Conan gets away with it, but that's kind of his thing. You know, Thor usually wears a shirt. Tunics are Thor's thing, and he didn't like that, I guess. So this is someone else besides Jimmy Chung. This is, I guess, who would be the second. Hector Collazo. Oh, wow, the Mask cartoon. I don't even remember that. Yeah, man, I do not even remember seeing that. I think I was saying in one of the previous videos, like, the success of that movie really killed any interest in the character for the most part. He sold some comic books before the movie, and then after the movie, it didn't really do a lot. That's a funny thing. Very, very brief window here where they were running 2 Conan books, still had 3 of the Ultraverse books on the subscription form. Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy. Ren and Stimpy had a surprisingly long run. Go to your computer right now and see how many issues Ren and Stimpy ran. You will be surprised. I mean, you go look over here just on the opposite page, the East Coast Comics page. First issue Ren and Stimpy's running for $16 in 1996 money. So that's not a small thing. Man, they had a lot of 2099 books, which were canceled within the year. A lot of people got new subscriptions to Amazing Spider-Man, because I think that's what they did, if I recall correctly. If you were subscribing to a book that got canceled, you were just given the rest of your subscription in Amazing Spider-Man. I think that's how it worked for decades. If I'm wrong, someone can chime in the comments, can help us out here. Hook us up. Everyone's like, why are you wearing a shirt, Thor? It's like, I don't know, why are you a teenager? They were going through some things. What's going on here? I forget. I think they're fighting the Zodiac in this one. Not one of the more high wattage Avengers foes. Oh, the worst ones are the ones where you're supposed to care about the personalities of the individual Zodiac. Oh, man, the 70s was a time. Libra Unleashed. Yeah, man, like late September birthdays. Got to watch out. Not recognizing any of these names and the... My goodness. Not anyone's favorite period of the Avengers books. Let's just be completely honest about that. I'm not trying to dog them. I'm just also, we can't have any illusions here. So let's look at a slightly older Iron Man comic that I remember more fondly. This is from the 1990 annual. Iron Man didn't have an annual in 89 or 88 because he didn't participate in the Evolutionary War or the Atlantis attack. Oh, wait, no, he wasn't Atlantis attacks. He wasn't in the Evolutionary War. I'm sorry. Iron Man Annual 10 was part 2 of Atlantis attacks. What am I thinking? What am I thinking? But he wasn't part of the Evolutionary War. So he didn't have an annual every year. But he had an annual for a few years here. There's a bit of Scotch tape on that cover. That was not, I did not put that there on purpose. How did that happen? Oh, I shouldn't do. Oh, that's terrible. I should probably just leave that, shouldn't I? I don't know how that happened. I didn't put that there. I don't know if I loaned this. Man, that's going to bug me. I should just move on. Like, yeah, Avengers Annual or Iron Man Annual 11. I'm sure if I want to get a mint copy, it'll put me back a whole $1.50. All right, so this is part of, in 88 and 89, Marvel did extended annual crossovers. The Evolutionary War in 88, Atlantis Attacks in 89. I love both of those stories absolutely to death. Wonderful stories. I say nothing bad about any of them. And then, but after that, you get the feel that they weren't exactly very fun to put together. So they kept doing annual crossovers, but they were smaller crossovers within the family of titles. Like, Spider-Man titles would do one. The X-Men books did another. This year, the first annual crossover for 1990 had like 4 characters who didn't fit anywhere else. Punisher, Daredevil, Hulk, Silver Surfer. And you're probably thinking, oh, how do you write a story that involves Punisher, Daredevil, Hulk, and Silver Surfer? And the answer was actually kind of interesting. It's a story called Lifeform. Didn't really do anything in terms of creating any characters or changing any status quos. But as a formal challenge to the question of how do you write a story with such and such disparate characters, it was very interesting. Now, the people putting together the Terminus Factor had a slightly easier go of it because they were dealing with characters who usually get together on the reg. Captain America was part 1, Iron Man part 2, Thor part 3, Avengers West Coast part 4, Avengers part 5. So these were characters who had a reason to be together. So you just had to figure out, an Avengers story big enough for 5 issues. So this is about Terminus. And the thing is this book, look, I'm not going to say Terminus was ever A-list. Terminus was only ever like generic Galactus being kind to him, shall we say. He's an 80s cosmic bad guy. He showed up a fair amount. This story complicated matters unnecessarily. This introduced a lot of Terminus lore that has never been mentioned again, I don't think. Because the next time he appears, I think he just basically comes back from space without acknowledging any of the events that happened here. Because the whole point is they were introducing a whole life cycle to the Terminus. And you're thinking, wait, but Terminus, isn't he just like a big dude who goes around from planet to planet, like buying them or something, like conquering them? Something like that. But this is, it complicates it. It starts off with bacteria, and then the bacteria infects smaller animals, and then they grow into the larger Terminus creature. And you see that's the progress we're watching here. In Captain America, it was a bunch of bacteria, then it infects a bear, so you get a Terminus bear. And it sort of becomes like what they later did with the Prometheus movies in terms of the alien, only instead of this little black goo that infects you and starts the life cycle of the alien creature, is these little Terminus bacteria that eventually grow into the giant planet monster. So, what can I say? We're going to get through it. We're going to do what we can. All right, this cover here by Tom Morgan, who did a lot of Iron Man. He did some Iron Man fill-ins. His work has grown on me. I didn't necessarily like him at the time, but I look back and I appreciate him now a lot more than I did then. Let's see here. What do we got? Starting off with Machine Man, who is a, as kind as I want to be in all the world, I can't say he was ever more than a C-lister. He's an Avenger who holds he is a full Avenger who also holds the honor of never actually having been serving on an Avengers team. He was just sort of an affiliate member, kind of like Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, who never served on the team but was trusted with membership. Someone could still put Machine Man on the Avengers very easily. At some point, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to get around him. He's a great character. He's just he's a robot. That's his deal. He's a robot who gains sentience, spends some time fighting the army. That's more or less his thing. Created by Jack Kirby, also had notable for having a few issues by Ditko as well. Not a lot of characters that both Kirby and Ditko have had significant runs on. Machine Man is one of them. There are a lot of characters that they both drew in the 60s, but, this was in the 70s. He's a 70s Kirby character. And like a lot of 70s Kirby character, he's a great deal of potential, maybe, in search of the proper outlet. He still has only been in a handful of good stories, I'd say, after decades. Roy and Dan Thomas need no introduction. Roy Thomas is still writing comics when they let him. He was writing comics in the 60s. I read a Wolverine story he did just that last year. Tom Morgan, as I said, Randy Emberlin, Janice Chang, although you probably could figure that out immediately upon me opening the book, because that's the most distinctive thing on the page is her letters. Nell Yomtov, his name was on a lot of books at the time. Howard Mackey, who was also writing Ghost Rider in 1990. Tom DeFalco, the Chief. So, as I said, that's no bear. That's a robot bear who's been infected by Terminus. Oh, and this is kind of a fun sequence. Roy Thomas, he takes a lot of guff. But the fact is, he knew how to write a comic. He knew how to get you going with a pretty fun action sequence here. Just a robot bear versus, eats Machine Man. And he barely saves Joe Costa's head because Joe Costa was basically destroyed in, I think, 1981, 82. And she was more or less a disembodied head for decades until they thought to put her in a body again. Not a particularly popular character. And Machine Man's buddy here, who I don't even remember this guy's name, that's how important he is. He is killed by the robot bear. And that's actually kind of if you think about it, that's sadistic. The robot bear doesn't eat him. The robot bear breaks his back. The robot bear is out. Oh, and speaking, you want to see the robot bear? You're like, this has to be cool. Oh, have you been taken over by the Terminus bacteria? Is that it? No, you have no excuse. All right, so we're picking up here with Tony Stark. It's Iron Man Annual, so you expect you would be picking up with Tony Stark. But he was also in the Captain America Annual that set this up. In fact, I remember there's a plot point, and maybe is that. So we're picking up with Tony Stark here because it's Iron Man Annual. I would hope to see Tony Stark at some point. He's digging around down there. So he was in that Captain America Annual. Him and Captain America first encountered the Terminus bacteria, I guess they're calling it. He's here doing something or other with Sunset Bane, who is on and off again, and not like a fighting antagonist, but a corporate antagonist. Half of Iron Man villains are just like other rich people who have bad attitudes about life. So he comes across Machine Man's had his arm torn off, and he's like, hey, I know this guy. He's an Avenger. I should maybe, like, make sure that he doesn't get eaten again, since it seems like someone already came along and ate half of him. What are you doing? I can't do anything with you here. All right, before I was so rudely interrupted here. Are you going to sit in that box? You can sit in that box. That's fine. So they oh my goodness, and I'm looking at this, and this is actually following up on the last issue of Machine Man's series from like 1980. That would have been apparently something involving Sunset Bane. I don't think I've read the first volume of Machine Man in decades. So the robot bear, there's the robot bear. He's doing something. Oh yeah, Sunset Bane. She was the Madam Menace, who was sort of trying to be like a janky Madam Mask. And Madam Mask is a really cool villain. Madam Menace, not a cool villain. So fighting the robot bear, and he decides he's going to drop a vat of liquid titanium, which I'm glad it has a nice little sign on it so that we can see what it is. He throws the liquid titanium, and then the robot bear just eats the titanium, becomes bigger. This is a nice looking book, though, I will say. Like I say, I underestimated this Tom Morgan guy at the time. It wasn't what I was necessarily looking for in comics, but this is strong stuff. This is dynamic, interesting. You know, it reads very well. Oh, I guess it was frigid liquid titanium, so it wasn't molten. Oh, okay, so that's what that's how they kill it. They basically just drench it in liquid titanium. It seems like a rough way to have to kill anything. Like that's better him than me. See, all right, so we're looking at the Terminus life cycle here with, oh my goodness. Apparently it's causing some kind of mass ecological disaster because all of these animals are getting infected with that bacteria and becoming Terminus. All right. Let's go terminate some Termini. Oh, Roy. Oh, Roy. My goodness. Okay, this is actually Media Watch. This is a feature that showed up in a few places over the period, which was basically just them making fun of television news, kind of like, or recapping what we'd already seen here. Yeah, they did this in a few places where they just were having, using the media to do some backstory, like, we begin tonight's special report on the Terminus Plague. So this is, reports are now coming in from all over the Northwest. Better than a text page. You can have this little running tally of, how this emergency is being seen on the broadcast news. Kind of interesting. Who did the art for that? That was Richard Howell. Richard Howell. I always like Richard Howell's work when I come across it. He did some of that. He did the second series of Vision and Scarlet Witch. Very closely associated with the Scarlet Witch character. Gavin Curtis. I think I saw him his name on something the other day, if I recall correctly. Oh, this story. I remember this. This is a really interesting number because it's about these disability rights activists, which is, wow, for 1990, you're not going to, I mean, you can barely see that stuff talked about still today. And it's disability rights activists chaining themselves to buses in protest of, I guess that would have been ADA compliance, or maybe this was before. I'm trying to remember, was the ADA in the 90s or the 80s? I don't even remember. But I do know it's within my lifetime that it was passed. And, you know, as we know, it's only as good as your ability to sue for compliance. But in 1990, this is interesting because this is the period right after when Tony Stark had been in a wheelchair for like 18 months, I want to say, for a good year and a half. He was shot, and then he had to have a special surgery, and then that created more problems down the line. But that's really interesting because, like I say, I mean, to do a big story, full-throated, you know, in favor of, you know, disability rights like this, I mean, that's something that you'd still aren't assured of seeing nowadays. That's fascinating. I remember this because this is, you know, I mean, it's an issue story, but, you know, it was a good one as far as that goes. It made an impact on me that I remembered it years later. Oh, my goodness. Speak of the devil. Steve Ditko drawing a Mrs. Arbogast story. See, now this is why I love the annuals from this period, because it was just, they put in all sorts of fun backups. The main story was only the front half of the book, so they had the whole other half of the book to fill out with all sorts of interesting things like, well, let's have Steve Ditko draw a story about Iron Man's secretary, his older middle-aged secretary, Mrs. Arbogast, who was actually a pretty well, you know, she got a fair amount of development over the years. I don't know when the last time she showed up was. But I remember it was just sort of funny that for a fair amount of time, Iron Man just had this old battle axe of a secretary who was really, really good at her job and sort of could put him in check, which is something that not every Iron Man supporting character can do. And Steve Ditko inking himself. I don't recognize the writer Carrie Barry. Would that be Carrie Barry? Steve Ditko inking himself, lettering by Chris Eliopoulos, colored by Renee Witterstatter. She was an editor. So yeah, it's an interesting creative team on that. And it's she's sitting around the office. Oh, hello. You came to see Steve Ditko inking himself. You're like, yeah, sure thing. Oh, a menace, an absolute menace. All right, so she's sitting around the office. Iron Man busts in fighting Whirlwind, and she has to help win the fight. And see, that's just was that 5 pages long? Yeah, 5-page long story about Iron Man's secretary. And here's a story about a kid playing Iron Man in the playground. That's, see, just a 5-page story about a kid who idolizes the invincible Iron Man. When hero worshiper Mikey Kurinsky, reluctant recipient of today's public education, garbs himself in polyester and cotton, revere wear armor, he becomes Brooklyn's greatest adolescent fighting machine, the invincible Iron Man. I don't think this character probably ever appeared again, or if he did, it was in no more than a panel somewhere. But that's just, you know, that's the type of fun thing that you're just not going to find, maybe for better or for worse. Story in pencils, Rob Tokar. That name is just, he showed up periodically, not ringing too much of a bell. Inks by Chris Ivey. He's someone who did more work. And it's just a sort of a story about a kid who's obsessed with the Avengers, and he's got to friend who's really into Captain America. It's corny, but I mean, it's interesting. And the last feature here. This is an interesting feature that probably needs some explanation, because this is a feature by Dwayne McDuffie, and it's sort of a damage control crossover. But Dwayne McDuffie was, for all his many talents, he was not an artist. So this is a story that's told solely in faxes between Mrs. Arbogast at Stark Enterprises and Damage Control. And it's just a different types of faxes about this damage. Because Damage Control, their whole thing is that they're basically they're a contracting company who does repair work for superhero fights. And they have their own construction company that they deal with, and office staff, and all this stuff. And the Damage Control series are some of my very favorite comic books that have ever been printed. I love them unreservedly and recommend them without question. Some of my very favorite comic books written by Dwayne McDuffie. And so Damage Control is exchanging faxes with Stark about apparently some sort of strange industrial waste. While the contents of your package are interesting, a bright yellow belt whose compartments are filled with an ingenious array of criminology equipment, smoke bombs, climbing tools, and sharp, bat-shaped boomerangs, among other things, it is not what I asked for, nor does it belong to me. I have returned the belt to you, and I would hope you will return my power source to me post-haste. And so it's basically going up different rungs on the chain, because the first Damage Control letter is from the gopher, the second Damage Control letter is from the account executive, the next is from the chief of operations, and the very next is from the ex-CEO of the company who went to Washington because they did something that threatened to blow up like 3 city blocks. And the final is a check made out to the Damage Control Political Action Committee. See, this Dwayne McDuffie was a very clever man. I have very fond memories of reading and rereading and reading to death and reading that feature, anything with Damage Control in it. I just read it to death. And my goodness, that 2 Iron Man books. Well, how about a Wonder Woman book? Balance them out here. This is an annual, since we're on the annual kick from 1997 when they had the Pulp Heroes theme. All the DC characters had annual stories that in some way were iterations on classic pulp genres like detective, war, tales of the unexpected. Even a couple did romance books and westerns. So this is from the John Byrne years. This is John Byrne with Tom Palmer. So, highlight of later Byrne, a whole extended annual he did with Tom Palmer. I remember these were the one-shots, prestige format one-shots they did for the Batman and Robin movie, the character shots. I remember the Mr. Freeze one especially had Paul Dini writing with Mark Buckingham and drawing it. Very nice looking book. Don't remember the Poison Ivy book as well, but I know that Brian Apthorpe fellow did a couple Poison Ivy stories around the time. I remember that because I remember my Poison Ivy. So it's this was, I think, this would have come out towards the end of like the second half of Byrne's run on Wonder Woman. I like Byrne's run on Wonder Woman, especially the first like half or so, when it's a really like dynamic action book. Later on, you know, he gets into continuity a bit more. It gets kind of in the weeds. You know, there's another Donna Troy retcon. But I think he had a good feel for the character as an action hero, which kind of sounds like a backhanded compliment, but sort of, you know, his theory of the case, so to speak, when he took over the book is that Wonder Woman was supposed to be, you know, a really powerful fighter. She was supposed to be able to go toe-to-toe with Superman, and she just wasn't being written like that at all. And that was kind of his goal, he said in interviews, was, you know, to make Wonder Woman, you know, a credible, you know, strong character. And I kind of think it worked, because he did a really good run of action stories. He had Wonder Woman fighting Doomsday. That was not the real Doomsday, but it was a fun slugfest nonetheless. He just put a lot of work into making interesting, you know, things for Diana to do that involve fighting. And, you know, it was maybe a necessary shot in the arm for the character at the time, because the character can kind of get lost. And, you know, I say this as someone who doesn't necessarily love Wonder Woman that much. I only buy Wonder Woman very occasionally when there's a creator I really like on the book. And it's because, you know, Wonder Woman sort of off in her own world. She has her own continuity. Are you going to jump up on here? It's an easy book for people to take for granted. Thank you. He takes umbrage to my thoughts on Wonder Woman. But I've never made any secrets about the fact that I'm only, you know, a fair weather Wonder Woman fan. You can't be a fan of everything. I've bought too many bad Spider-Man comics in my life. I don't need to justify myself. What did you do over there? So, anyway, that's just my perspective as someone who's not a huge Wonder Woman fan, but notices that, you know, she's like a lot of fantasy characters in comics. You know, her book tends to get insular real quickly. Thor is the same way. I like Thor more, but I admit that Thor, you know, if you're not really into Thor, sometimes it can look from a distance like it's just lost in the weeds of, you know, mythological setting and characters that don't interact with any other part of their respective universe, or, you know, rarely so. So I'm not paying any. I'm just sort of looking at this very nicely drawn comic book, which appears to be about there's some sort of, what was that? Oh, someone's got the zoomies. I don't even know what I was saying. My brain was completely flummoxed by this animal. What can I say? Wonder Woman comic book. Some sort of flashback to back when she was a girl. Some sort of dark secret uncovered that reflects on that was another thing that from the Byrne years was he had her more involved in archaeology, because he thought, well, I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense. Wonder Woman, what is she going to do for a living if she wants to make money? Well, she could give archaeological lectures very easily. And so she started hanging around museums, and that's where she met the girl who would be the next Wonder Girl, Cassie Sandsmark. There have been a lot more Wonder Girls since then. But see, like I say, there were some good things about that period of the book. What's this? All right. Looks like an Artemis story with Joan Weiss, I don't recognize the name, but Ed Bennis. There is a name that has that you might recognize. He started off as a Mike Deodato clone, just straight up, and it took a while, I think, for him to come out of that shadow. By the time he gets to doing Birds of Prey with Gail Simone, he's sort of come into his own. You can always see a little bit of that that school in his work, certainly. But this is very early for him, I think. He'd been at Image. I want to say he did Image before he was working at DC, but don't quote me on that. Barbara, is that a K? Is that a Kahlberg? Kahlberg or Rahl? I think it's Kahlberg. Inks. John Costanza lettering. So Artemis. This is after she's. This is the character who was the lead, the co-lead for a while, the year before Byrne took over. And Byrne, I'm trying to remember. I don't know if Byrne used Artemis once, or more than a crowd scene. They tried very half-heartedly to sell her as her own thing outside of Wonder Woman, but basically, she didn't have the staying power of Azrael, who in the Azrael book lasted like 100 issues. And then the guy died, but, still lasted 100 issues. Artemis did not get any kind of solo push, really, to speak of. I liked the character just fine. Because I was reading Wonder Woman. I liked the William Messner Loeb's run, which I believe I've discussed on the channel before. I liked the John Byrne run. And then I sort of drifted away. Although maybe I would have... I guess she did come back at least some point, because there she is on a Byrne cover. So there's the last back half of the Byrne run I don't remember as well as the first. The first is quite memorable. Okay, so wow, we've been through all of 3 comics. How much more time we got here? Oh, well, we still have a few minutes. What do we got? How about we look at... Oh, here's one for you. Mutant X. I am consistently amazed that I bought Mutant X for as long as I did, because my memory is just that this was not a very good comic book. And yet I bought at least the first year of it. Was it just because Cary Nord drew it? I liked his work on Daredevil. He did a run on Daredevil before this that was very memorable. That's sort of where Cary Nord became, got his little push, was his work on Daredevil with, I want to say, Tom Payer. If it's not Tom Payer, I'm correcting myself on the screen, but I think it was Tom Payer. Anyway, if you've never heard of Mutant X, this really, like at the very end of the first volume of X Factor, long after X Factor had been it wasn't a book about the original 5 X-Men, it had been a book about a government team of mutants. And at first it was a public team, and then it sort of became a black ops team. It got progressively less good, shall we say. And then in the very last issue of X Factor, Havoc died. But he didn't really die. What he did was he went to an alternate universe, and that is where Mutant X takes place. And you're thinking, oh, another alternate universe filled with mutants. Yes, another alternate universe filled with mutants. And you can see, the Age of Apocalypse was just a few years before this, because this was like 98, I want to say. This was issue 10 in 99. So this book came out in 98. And from a, mercenary standpoint, looking at the Age of Apocalypse, you could definitely see alternate universes filled with mutants. They seem to do pretty well for us. So we had Mutant X, which was a monthly book set in a whole alternate Marvel universe filled with alternate versions of not just, mutant characters, because you get to see, like Ben Grimm. He was a supporting character. Was that Daredevil? See, I don't remember any of this. The Mole Man. See, it's just the whole Marvel universe, just in a weird little stew, and that's the version of Magneto. Madeline Pryor is very prominent in this, just like she was very prominent in X-Men. She had a weird 90s. Don't remember at all what was happening. And I'm amazed that I bought it for this long. I'm amazed that I bought it past issue 2, to be honest with you, because I do not remember this book very fondly. Maybe it was just at the newsstand where I was buying. I don't know, because I ended up buying stuff. Sometimes if it was on the newsstand, or if it was in the supermarket when I was had allowance in my pocket, or whatever I was spending at this time in my life. But yep, see, maybe I bought it from Madeline Pryor. I don't know. I do quite like Madeline Pryor, and I will at least read anything that she's in. See, this is the funny thing is, though, this is actually not that, but this is actually a better Polaris costume than Polaris has ever had. I was actually talking with Claire a while back, and we were laughing over the fact that Lorna Dane has never had a good costume, and I think she's had not terrible costumes, but for the most part, yeah, I couldn't really argue the point. Polaris just not a strong costume game. When I first started reading comics, Polaris wasn't Magneto's daughter. That was, I think, if I recall correctly, she had thought she wasn't. They weren't going with that anymore, but then later on they just sort of, I think, went with it at some point and decided, okay, we'll have her be her daughter for real, not just... Are you okay? Someone's got the zoomies, my friend. Someone has the zoomies. What were they advertising? Oh, Daredevil 9. That's first appearance of Echo. Spider-Girl 10. I was buying Spider-Girl for the first year or so. I bought all of the M2 books. I really like those creators. Although, if you think about it, having Mutant X on the stands the same month as they had the Spider-Girl, which was a whole other alternate universe, they were kind of getting lost in the weeds there. This Incredible Hulk and Superman book, I actually discussed this on my TikTok channel last month. And they were putting out a new trade paperback of the first 4 issues of the NAM, which are still some of the finest looking comic books Marvel has ever put out. Michael Golden art. They put them out in black and white as well in the NAM magazine. If you ever see any iteration of those stories, even if you're not a War Comics fan, they're gorgeous stories. It's definitely worth your time to at least flip through. Man, I don't know what's going on here. Aren't a lot of backgrounds in this comic. Yeah, the Spider-Girl, one of the spin-offs was this A-Next, which was the Future Avengers book. That was already on issue 10. They expanded that line way too quickly. This is during the Magneto War and the regular X-Men books. Magneto War. Kurt Busiek was still on Thunderbolts. My goodness. Oh, they were getting ready to do the second Contest of Champions, which I remember being fun. Chris Claremont actually came back to write that, so it's a late era Chris Claremont Marvel event. There's a Rogue versus Captain Marvel fight in it, if I recall correctly. And you know, I usually do remember correctly when it comes to Rogue trivia. That's not bad looking. If you're just buying it because there's a Rogue, she was on the cover, and she was barely in this. She was on the cover. I'm looking back and thinking, where's my Rogue? Yeah. See, there's a Reed Richards enthrall to the Madeline Pryor. I mean, you know, it's a living. Okay, so just for my own peace of mind, we're verifying that Rogue only appears in literally one panel of this comic book, and she is literally on the logo. I'm not going to get interested enough in Mutant X to track down the rest of the run, but I'm sure it'll come up eventually. Since apparently I was buying it. What can I say? I didn't always do intelligent things with money as a child. I think that rather speaks for itself. What do we got? Well, time for one more, maybe a quick one. What do we got here? Here's a Donald Duck. Let's look at a Donald Duck in 5 minutes. Donald Duck Adventures from the period when Disney was being distributed by Marvel, which is why there's a Marvel logo on the cover there. So that would have been like 92, 93? 93, December 93. This was 23 of Donald Duck Adventures. They were picking up the numbering from the original Gladstone run. Donald Duck Adventures, that was where they put the longer Donald Duck stories, because certainly the classic, you know, Barks schema, you know, he did short stories, he did 10 pages for Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, and he also did the long issue length adventure stories. And so you'd have which one is this? This is not a Carl Barks, but a Marco Rota, scripted by Gary Gabner, lettered by Jane Simek and John Clark. Oh, so, yeah, I don't know any of the, certainly doing their best Carl Barks here. Sort of putting Donald Duck into an asterisk story. Oh, hello. Now's the time to fill in the gaps of your collection. See, Gladstone was actually... Gladstone, they were still selling back issues. I don't think Disney or not Disney, DC or Marvel ever did that, but some of the smaller companies could do that. You don't see that so much anymore. Donald Duck is a Viking. You know, I like Donald Duck. I'll read pretty much any Donald Duck, but I don't know if I would have read a non-Barks Duck adventure more than one time, because I don't remember this. I read. Yeah, you can tell it's not a Barks one, because Daisy Duck actually does something. She isn't really much of a presence in the Barks stories. Yeah, see, he's a little guy who's got a big, Viking strongman next to him. Of course, you know, I'm sorry, are we in your way? Of course, I honestly don't know how many people in America know who Asterisk is. I didn't grow up reading Asterix. I didn't grow up reading Tintin either. Oh, you can sit. I'm almost done anyway, so. So, Fun Donald Duck Adventure. Looking to see if I recognize any of the names here. Now, the reason to get this is, of course, there's a Don Rose, a cover. He did covers for the series even when he didn't have a story in it, so, just looking at these letters here, because they always ran long letters from people who were really enthusiastic about old school Disney. So you'd end up learning something usually, because people would be writing it about the most recondite matters, so to speak. I mean, that's sort of the problem with Disney comics at this period, is the audience was a little bit older than maybe could support a kid's comic book line. But that's, we're the weird company, we're the weird country where Donald Duck doesn't just sell, massive amounts of comic books anymore. But I've discussed that before. Anyway, I think that's about it for today. So pay attention. I got lots of videos here you can go check. You can go watch my daily reviews on Instagram or TikTok. The addresses should be on the screen now or momentarily. I have a weekly newsletter that goes out. It's a significant amount of writing. I write about music. I write about comics. I write about anime I've been writing about lately. So lots of stuff on there. Plus I answer letters. And I got a Patreon. So there's lots of different ways that you can interface with my work and figure out how to give me money for it. I also do a podcast with Claire Napier. It's also available on YouTube. It's about Witchblade and Top Cow and Mark Silvestri and all that stuff. It's called Udder Madness. We just recently got on Spotify, so if you use Spotify, you can just search for Udder Madness, UDDER, and we're right there. Can't think of anything else. I got too much stuff to promote. All right. Catch you later.